This is the 41st conference of which our founders had a vision in 1983 that we would be here. So we cannot no longer stand on your knees, but stand on our feet, 10 toes down, flapping our wings to aspire to greatness so the next generation of our students can be where we are now, but better 41 years from now. You believe that?
Here to welcome you to the John Crum Golf Classic.
And it's also a good time, I think it's great for women to be on the course. There's such a stigma around women being in the golf course, so I think playing and engaging with our male partners is good. Yes.
We know a lot of business happens on the golf course, and so over the years I have always been encouraged to need to get into the game of golf.
Here you are, meeting professionals. That's high. Meeting professionals. You all are at the center of what happens every summer.
And as you flapped your wings, you shook off all the insecurities, all the depression, all the things that people who said you can't do it, all the reasons why you thought you could not stand in rooms where you didn't think you were supposed to be, knowing that the door was just too small for you to walk in. So some of you kneeled down, some of you walked on your knees. But I'm saying to you, we have to remember who we are. It was meant to say to you that you have the strength, you have the resilience, but you have to believe in yourself before we can believe in each other. Does that make sense?
First time at the conference, and so we're excited to be here and really take away all the knowledge, the networking, the relationship building, and really take that back to our peers in our community back in Madison.
I would say that NCBMP has done so much for my career. It put me in doors I never thought that I could be in.
The key factor in things that have always been said over and over at Coalition is that we do business with our friends and people that we know.
Stop waiting for permission to be great. I think it's MC Light who raps, you can be what you want to be, but let negativity run you. It'll ruin your destiny. I love this piece right here because here it is. I am not just going to learn the game to get good at the game. I'm going to transform the game. And I think that's what point I want to make right here, and that is go ahead, learn the game, succeed in the game, but don't stop at success. Aspire for greatness, because Dr. King said if you want to be great, serve. And anybody can be great because anybody can serve. The question becomes, are you simply doing this and it's just about you, or are you doing it so the next generation can reap fruit from the work that you are investing in?
Good afternoon. My name is Jason Dunn, CEO of the National Coalition of Black Community Professionals, and I greet you on behalf of our chairman, Kevin Richardson, our board of directors, our members, and in the spirit of our founders. Today, we're talking about the Empowerment Series Executive Orders 102. If you're with us at the last couple of weeks ago, we had Executive Orders 101, and now we're kind of breaking down a different kind of conversation, but rooted in the past. So essentially, we're going to go over what we talked about a couple of weeks ago, and then kind of dive down into the current administration's role in their executive orders, in addition to how it impacts the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and what that means for many of us who work in corporate America and or in associations. Our speaker today is Mr. Wiley S. Adams. He is the 82nd president of the National Bar Association and is the leader of the NBA during the Centennial Bar Year. And so we want to make sure he comes on. He's going to help us kind of walk through this conversation, the fireside chat type of model. Mr. Wiley, let's begin.
Thank you. So happy to be here with you today, and thank you for your very generous remarks.
Yes, sir. Yes, indeed. So let's just start with kind of introducing the National Bar Association to our guests, whom also are members of the National Coalition of Black Media Professionals as well. But want to make sure we kind of give people a perspective of what the National Bar does and how they have contributed to our community overall.
Thank you. Please allow me first to give a shout out to my comrade and partner in justice, Frank Seals. I'm happy to be here with you today. So the National Bar Association represents the interest of over 67,000 Black lawyers and judges around the country. The organization was formed in 1925 when the prevailing bar association at the time did not allow Black lawyers to join, to have a seat at the table. So we therefore created our own table, and hence the National Bar Association was born. So today we're celebrating our centennial anniversary, and we have so many great things going on, including our centennial convention, which will be held here in Chicago, Illinois. So really festive time and festive year for the National Bar Association. I will add there's some clouds which are overhead, things that we thought we might have had, behind us, but they're reemerging today. But we were built for this, and we will persevere, and we will be leaders in the fight for justice. The National Bar Association is more than just a professional association. We are protectors of social justice and equality throughout the land.
And it's interesting that our organizations, who were started some 100 years ago, are still having the same conversations and still fighting the same fight. We need each other more now than we ever did before. Thank you for that lead up. So let's just kind of, I want to kind of give a historical piece. I know we again had our event a couple weeks ago. For those who missed it, we'd like to hear from your perspective on the executive orders and what they are, and the various branches of government, and then we can kind of go into the discussion points as stated in the beginning, to talk about the 1964 Civil Rights Act, what that means, and kind of where we are now as a constitutional maybe crisis based upon what happens in the next couple of months. I yield to you.
Thank you. And before we get started, let me preface my remarks with the following. While I'm president of the National Bar Association, my remarks today are my own. The NBA is nonpartisan, not for profit. I intend my remarks to be nonpartisan as well, but we must speak to the issues of the day, whether you're an independent, a Republican, a Democrat, or any other political allegiance. I intend to address a couple of matters of concern: the recent political assaults on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the impact and implications of such assaults on, obviously, the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and generally speaking, the civil rights legislation. But for illustrative purposes today, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which outlawed discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, and national origin. But before we dive into the legal and social impacts I just described, it's essential to understand first our system of governance. One of the things, our system of governance and the tools that are being used to impact that, which are the executive orders. I know that Dr. Perry covered this topic in an earlier segment, but a little review is helpful to level set. You should also know that nothing, I repeat that nothing, has changed about our system of representative democracy since January 20th, which was the start of the new administration. However, we have always relied upon the good faith and character of our elected officials to operate in conformity with established norms and precedent. In the sake of getting things done, however, the new administration is testing those norms and boundaries of the executive power. So a very quick recap about the federal government. Most of you can probably give this portion of the presentation, but reminders are helpful. The federal government of the United States is structured upon the principle of separation of powers, which divides authority among three distinct branches: the legislative, executive, and judicial. Each branch operates independently while maintaining a system of checks and balances designed to prevent any one branch from becoming too powerful. Their distinct yet interdependent functions ensure the effective governance of our nation. The legislative branch, primarily represented by Congress, holds the authority to promulgate, to create, amend, and repeal laws. Comprised of two chambers, the Senate and the House of Representatives, this branch reflects the democratic will of the people and the states. It is responsible for drafting legislation, approving the federal budget, and overseeing the actions of the executive branch. Let me repeat that last part. It is responsible for overseeing the actions of the executive branch. Some might say the Republican Congress has abdicated this responsibility in the face of an aggressive Republican president. Additionally, Congress has the power to declare war, ratify treaties, and impeach federal officials. It ensures accountability within the government. The executive branch, headed by the president, is tasked with implementing, enforcing, and administering the laws enacted by Congress. This branch includes federal agencies, departments, and the military, all of which work to ensure the practical application of legislative policies. The president also serves as the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, negotiates treaties, and represents the nation on the global stage. Furthermore, through executive orders and regulatory measures, the executive branch plays a critical role in shaping public policy and responding to emerging national challenges. Now, the judicial branch, which is led by the Supreme Court, is responsible for interpreting the law and ensuring its consistent application across the nation. Through judicial review, this branch has the authority to assess the constitutionality of legislation and executive actions. Lower federal courts, including district and appellate courts, adjudicate cases involving federal law and disputes between states, individuals, and the government. By upholding the rule of law and protecting individual rights, the judiciary serves as a safeguard against governmental overreach and ensures that justice is administered both fairly and impartially. Together, these three branches create a system of governance that balances authority, promotes accountability, and upholds the Constitution, which is the highest law in the land. Their distinct separate roles, combined with mechanisms for oversight and collaboration, ensure that the federal government functions effectively while protecting the rights and freedoms of its citizens. However, on occasion, one branch may seek to swerve out of its lane a little bit, and it is the responsibility of the other branches to serve as a check and balance and call that out. So maybe I should give just a brief overview with respect to executive orders. So what is a U.S. presidential executive order? Simply put, it's a directive from the president. On a more detailed basis, a U.S. presidential executive order is a legally binding directive issued by the president to federal agencies, departments, or officials that manage the operations of the federal government. Executive orders are a powerful tool that allow a president to act without immediate congressional approval, shaping policy, guiding how laws passed by Congress are implemented. It is done by the stroke of a pen, or in the case of this president, a Sharpie. The authority to issue executive orders comes from the U.S. Constitution, specifically the Take Care Clause. That's Article 2, Section 3, which requires the president to ensure that the laws are faithfully executed. Executive orders have the force of law. That is, they're binding within their lawful areas of authority, but they cannot create new laws or appropriate funds. Those powers remain within Congress's authority. However, executive orders can significantly impact civil rights, federal programs, and workplace policies, depending on how they direct federal agencies to enforce existing laws or allocate resources. Over the years, U.S. presidents have used executive orders to shape critical aspects of American life. For example, President Truman desegregated the armed forces with an executive order. President Johnson he established affirmative action policy for federal contractors to address employment discrimination. But today we see this powerful tool being weaponized in an attempt to dismantle DEI programs and weaken the EEOC's enforcement authority. So that's a quick background on EOs and generally our checks and balances within the government.
So first, let me say this to the listeners. President Adams was on a flight, and he's a little under the weather. Someone was sitting beside him that did not wear a mask. Or those of you who are sick and not wearing a mask, getting folks sick, you should be ashamed of yourself. Put a mask on if you're sick. So that's what's going on. So let's give him some grace. I thank you for running through that. So today we get to where you left off at, and so you are correct. There are the various groups of or legislative bodies that direct and hold accountable the various branches of the government. And so now we find ourselves with the EOs that were sent out, and some have been, per Dr. Perry a couple weeks ago, spoke to in court at the moment. And as they go through court, one of the things that have been, to your point, weaponized is the EEOC. And EEOC is a kind of seen as a safeguard between as a holding people accountable to following the 1964 Civil Rights Act. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. That the 1964 Civil Rights Act was produced under great pressure from Dr. Martin Luther King and others to balance the scales of justice and provide equality to all. However, that law was not being followed, and so additional steps were necessary, hence the EEOC. And the EEOC is intended to be a bit of an independent agency. And what I mean by that, the president has limited authority to take certain action with respect to the EEOC. It cannot remove its commissioners absent a good reason. And typically for the EEOC, it's when their terms expire. You may have noted that recently the president fired or attempted to fire 2 EEOC commissioners. That action is not lawful within the enabling legislation of the EEOC. And therein lies the tension that I referred to before, the tension which is, hey, between executive power and congressional authority. So Congress passed a statute, and this president is seeking to go around the statute as an efficient way of getting done his agenda. Whether or not the president has the power to do that is ultimately something that I believe will be decided by the courts and probably the U.S. Supreme Court, primarily because, as I mentioned, these 3 roles, Congress produces legislation, the president carries out the law, and the Supreme Court interprets the law. So whether or not this executive power the president is seeking to assume can do the things that he's looking to do is an open question. But I do believe that this conservative-led Supreme Court is likely to uphold the authority of the president, primarily because executive power, all of it, not just some of it, is intended to be vested in the executive branch. So if the president cannot remove a commissioner, if it cannot have oversight of a federal agency, then it's questionable whether or not he can carry out his duty and is fully empowered within the Constitution with all of the executive power that the Constitution states that it has.
Makes sense. And so, well, it does make sense on paper. It does. So let's bring this home a little bit. And so the EEOC is a vehicle that is used if you're an employee of an organization and you have been involved in a discriminatory practice or have had issues as it relates to what you just said, as far as what it means. The EEOC is that force that actually you report to, right? Or your HR, you work with your HR department, and you can report outside of that, and that the EEOC would then come in or do an investigation. Or is that correct?
Yeah, that's generally correct. So let me just talk about what is the EEOC. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission is a critical federal agency tasked with enforcing laws that promote fairness, equality, and justice in the American workplace. As we mentioned, it was established under the Civil Rights Act of 1964. It plays a critical role in protecting workers from discrimination and ensuring that employers uphold their legal obligation to provide equal employment opportunities. Um, what's the role of the EEOC? Well, the EEOC is responsible for enforcing federal laws that make it illegal to discriminate against a job applicant or an employee on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, including pregnancy, sexual orientation and gender identity, national origin, age, disability, or genetic information. Some of the agency's core functions are investigating complaints of discrimination. The EEOC receives and investigates charges of workplace discrimination. It collects evidence, interviews witnesses, and reviews employment practices, determine if unlawful discrimination has occurred. It mediates and settles disputes. The agency offers mediation services to help employers and employees resolve discrimination disputes without going to court. It can file lawsuits when necessary. The EEOC files lawsuits against employers on behalf of individuals or groups to address patterns of discrimination and enforce compliance with federal laws. It also can issue regulations and guidance. The EEOC provides guidance to help employers understand and comply with federal anti-discrimination laws. It develops policies and regulations to address emerging issues such as workplace harassment, pay equity, and retaliation. It has a public education and outreach function. The agency conducts educational programs to promote awareness of workplace rights and responsibilities. It offers resources and training to employers, employees, and advocacy organizations to prevent discrimination before it occurs. What's the mission of the EEOC? Is to prevent and remedy unlawful employment discrimination and to advance equal opportunity for all in the workplace. The mission reflects the agency's commitment to promoting inclusive workplaces free from discrimination and harassment. So there's lots of things out there that the EEOC is charged to do. It has been a powerful vehicle in promoting fairness in the workplace. It's underpinned by a statute, which is a law that the president, while the president faithfully carries out the law, the president cannot create law and cannot change law. And that's part of the things we're talking about with these EOs. You may remember one thing that an EO tried to eliminate was birthright citizenship. With respect to birthright citizenship, that is clearly embedded within the Constitution, and no Sharpie or executive order has the ability to rewrite the Constitution. However, lawyers are very clever in crafting arguments to kind of get around things, but I would think that even this Supreme Court will see the folly in trying to get rid of birthright citizenship. But what's going on is kind of a massive attack on many levels. So it's hard to address everything that's going on. And so what you see is a mass attack and having us sort of responding to things which are not within the rule of law. And as lawyers, my job and others' lawyers' job is to make sure that the rule of law is applied.
So President Adams, that what you just said is very clear to me. So is EEOC supposed to be an independent organization, correct? Is that correct?
It is.
And the Civil Rights Act was essentially the model per which people weren't following. That's what I hear you saying without saying it, correct? They weren't following what it was supposed to do. And so EEOC was layered over that to be the protection or the enforcer to ensure that legislation was being carried out, protected, and people were held accountable based upon because they knew people weren't, right? And so now that the president has tried to change the persons who are leading it, does that in effect change the mission of EEOC, or is he using it in a different way that maybe less impactful for what his current mission was supposed to be?
I think it's the latter. What he's trying to do is to take what steps he reasonably can to make sure that the agency carries out his policy and his objectives. And there's where the tension will come in. On the one hand, the EEOC was set up as an independent agency, and Congress has insulated it from politics and also the presidency by putting conditions on the removal of the commissioners of that agency. That is where I think there will be some constitutional tension, because the president is charged with executing the law. And all the executive power is vested in the executive branch. So the president has to have the ability to have the agencies carry out his policies, but at the same time, those policies must be consistent with law. So his way around it is, well, I'm going to be a little aggressive, remove these commissioners, try to appoint new commissioners who will do as best they can my bidding and have the same political understanding as I do. And the other thing I'll do is I'll just starve them to death. That from the budget, I just will not fund these. I'll illegally freeze funds that have been properly appropriated by Congress for these purposes. And that part is clear that the president does not have the authority to do. In fact, he was impeached over this issue, during Trump 1.0, where, with Ukraine, he was withholding funds from Ukraine to get a political victory. However, in Trump 2.0, there will be no consequences of impounding those funds in a similar situation, because our president now has immunity. And as long as it's tied to an official act, he's free to do so without consequence. So what we find ourselves with is a presidential office holder who is fully emboldened to take some steps that there were checks and balances and breaks in Trump 1.0. Those checks and balances are removed in Trump 2.0. And now the question is, Congress is intended to provide oversight of the executive branch. We have a Republican-dominated Congress, and I think that they may not be up to the task of providing that crucial oversight. That then leads us to the courts to interpret, okay, here's a statute, that's the law of the land. Here the president is doing things which appear to be contrary to the law of the land. In that case, so if you're trying to do something which is contrary to the law, then the law ought to prevail, with the narrow exception, as I mentioned, to the extent that an agency is exercising executive authority, that authority should be within the executive branch. And so there may be an initial loss, but it will be followed by a victory in terms of the law is the law, and the president cannot change that.
And so I appreciate that. And so, we are not, just as you are not, a political organization with the politics impact our members. And so, why this is important, ladies and gentlemen, is because one is, the integrity of why civil rights legislation was created was, frankly, to ensure, again, that the laws were being withheld. It helped, frankly, us get the right to vote and to work without discriminatory issues, getting higher practices as well. Getting involved in schools, et cetera. All those things are impactful to our communities. And so as we look at this, if something happens to you at work, if you are a small business owner, or if you are VP or on a team where discriminatory practices are happening towards you, the way that this may end in court will benefit you or hurt you in the long run if you're not paying attention, which is why we're having a discussion about it now. And so, to your point, President Adams, as we kind of meander through this discussion, is getting to the Supreme Court. And well, I guess as the goal is to get to the Supreme Court, as people are assuming or projecting it will be. And then, so from your perspective, I think you stated that the president have executive powers, but this is clearly a conflict of the constitutional law that may be that could, depending upon how the courts rule, could change the way that we look at things for the future. and could impact us currently as we know our current employment rights are. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. I mean, we've had one big change which has occurred, which is the Supreme Court arming the president with presidential immunity so long as it's within an official act. I would suspect that this Supreme Court going forward will strike down and say that the ability to limit the president's authority to remove agency heads and officials is on thin constitutional ice, because that to the extent that body exercises executive authority, the president has to, for policy reasons, control it. However, while that may be true, the law that is out there is still the law, and the president has a duty to carefully and faithfully carry out the laws of the land. And so that part, I think there ought to be a victory. But if you're able to hold the purse strings from the organization and reduce the personnel there, then the effectiveness of that organization is substantially diminished. So we're seeing several things, this agency being attacked at on several layers. First, let's get rid of its leadership. Secondly, let's impound the funds, and now you go see what you can do in this new world where it's not the same agency that we knew in the past. It's a stripped down agency with much reduced power. And the law is still the law, but the question is the president carefully and faithfully carrying out the laws of the land? I would argue not under those circumstances.
Agreed. So as a national bar, I'm sure that many of your members are being involved in some of the court actions across the country and being pulled there, here and there. Kind of what can we do? What can associations do? Is there something that we can assist the National Bar with, or what kind of advice, free advice, because free advice, could you offer? Free advice could you offer people who are listening now to prepare for not necessarily individually issues, but overall in general? What would you offer as we close the conversation?
What I would offer is this. We should always remember there's more power in the people than in the people in power. Mm-hmm. And so we must always act as citizens, act to protect our system of governance. And what that means, it's a representative democracy. So we must petition, we must call, we must write our legislative officials and let them know our unhappiness with the way things are going. We should have public protests so that people can agitate. And part of my job is to motivate people to go out where there's injustice taking place. My job is to go out and, one, ring the bell, let people know what's going on, because part of what this administration is doing, it's one, getting rid of the watchdogs. So the people who report out about things which are unlawful taking place, the first thing he did when he got in office is fire all the watchdogs. The next thing that he's up to is with respect to the free press, eliminating press which doesn't spin the story the way he would like it spun. And so that light that comes in to shine on these things so we can see what's going on, he's seeking to eliminate that. So we must restore the light. Darkness can't get rid of darkness, as King once said, only light can do that. So we must write our legislatures, let them know how we feel about that, engage in peaceful protest. There'll be protests. I'm going down to Selma in a couple weeks' time to commemorate the crossing of the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And I think that's a good flashpoint to reinvigorate some of these efforts. And the playbook is the same. What we're experiencing today is just another form of what we experienced in the past. And we must stand tall, speak up, and let our voices be heard, such that I think even our elected officials will be called upon to do the right thing.
President Adams, thank you so much for giving us a little bit of your time. I know, again, you're under the weather, and we appreciate you soldiering through. Again, guys, let's support the National Bar Association. Whatever we can do, go to their website, visit them. If you have a chapter in your city, if they have a gala or some type of scholarship, please involve yourself with them to the point that you can. And let's thank President Adams for all his work and his leadership, along with his board as well. So listen, don't forget that we are going to Portland, Oregon, November the 19th through the 22nd. Make sure you stay close as we open up registration at the end of May. Stay close to get more webinars like this and more education as we inspire, we empower, innovate, and act. We'll bring these things to you to ensure that you're educated, motivated, and if we have to, I can't say that because we're not a political organization, but we're going to move forward and make sure that our people are empowered. Thank you so much, and see you next time.
It's been my pleasure to be here today. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for the President. I appreciate it so much.
Thanks.